Wyoming Territory, August 1881, the first time Barrett Pike saw her. She was being forced into the back of a supply wagon like she was nothing more than old furniture no one wanted anymore. The sun was high, hot enough to bake the dust into the cracked earth of the trail behind the church, and the preacher's wife stood with her arms folded, her mouth tight with judgment. "We cannot keep her. She's no good to her kin, no good to the town. Sick in the head or sick in the heart, it doesn't matter. She's a burden. And burdens get sent away." Barrett had been passing through town to pick up fencing wire and salt blocks for his cattle. He had not planned on watching a woman with bare feet and a torn blue dress be cast out like a stray dog. She did not fight. She just looked down at her hands, folded in her lap like she could disappear inside them if she stayed still enough. Her blonde hair was tangled, half hiding her face, and her arms were thin, scraped up like she had fallen more than once. "What is her name?" Barrett asked, his voice low but firm. The preacher's wife turned to him, annoyed. "That's no concern of yours, Mr. Pike. I am making it my concern." A younger man, maybe a cousin or a brother by the look of him, stood by the wagon and muttered, "Her name's Temperance Vane. She ain't right after her husband died. And she got 2 little ones left them behind in Cheyenne last winter. No one knows what became of them. She is not fit to be around people anymore." Barrett looked at her again. The way her shoulders curled inward, like she'd been told too many times to be quiet, to be small, to be less. He saw something else, too. A flicker in her eyes, quick and sharp, like a match striking in the dark. "I'll take her," he said. The preacher's wife blinked. "What?" "I said I'll take her. If she is a burden, then I'll carry her myself." Temperance's head lifted, just a little. Barrett walked to the wagon and reached up, offering his hand. "Come on. You are not staying where you are not wanted." She stared at his hand like she was not sure it was real. Then, slowly, she placed her bruised palm in his. He helped her down. Barrett's ranch sat at the base of a red cliff 2 hours west of town, where the grass grew higher and the wind did not carry other people's opinions. He had been living there alone since his father died 5 years back. He did not mind the silence. But now, riding double with Temperance in front of him, her back pressed careful against his chest, the silence felt full for the first time. When they got to the cabin, she hesitated on the porch. He watched her eyes scan the land, the barn, the corral, the open door. "You can go inside," he said gently. "It is yours now too." "I do not have anything," she said. "I do not need you to bring anything," he said. "Just be here." That first night, she did not speak much. She sat in the corner by the hearth while he made beans and cornbread. She ate slowly, like every bite had to be earned. Barrett did not press her. He just handed her a quilt for the cot near the fire and said, "You sleep where you like. I will be out in the barn." She startled. "You do not have to do that." "I know," he said. "But I figure you might sleep better knowing I am not breathing down your neck." She looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you." Barrett nodded. "You are not a burden here, Temperance." She looked down again, but this time, her lips pressed tight like she was holding something in. The second morning, he found her washing the breakfast dishes with rainwater she had gathered herself. Her hands were red from the cold, but she did not stop. "You do not have to do chores," he said. "I do not want to be useless," she replied. "You are not." She did not look up. "I used to be a mother." He stepped closer, but not too close. "You still are." She finally looked at him, and there was pain there, deep and cracked like dried mud. "Their names are Grace and Galen. They were 5 and 3 last winter. I left them with my sister in Cheyenne after my husband died. I thought I would come back for them, but then I could not get out of bed, and by the time I tried, my sister had moved. No one knows where." Barrett's chest ached. We will find them. Her eyes filled. You do not even know me. I know enough. She blinked, and one tear slid down her cheek. Why are you being kind to me? He reached out slowly, brushing the tear away with the back of his finger. Because you deserve it. Over the next weeks, Barrett watched her come back to life. She began feeding the chickens. She swept the porch. She laughed once short and unsure, but real when a goat tried to climb into the pantry. Sometimes, she sat beside him after supper in silence, their chairs pulled close by the fire. He never touched her without asking. He never asked questions she was not ready to answer. But one night, she said, "You are the first person who did not look at me like I was broken." "I do not think you are broken," he said. "I think you are healing." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "Why?" "Because you are still here." She reached out, her hand brushing his. Her fingers were warm. He turned his palm up, letting her decide. She laced her fingers through his. They sat like that until the fire burned low. One morning, she came in from gathering eggs and said, "I want to find them, my children. I want to go to Cheyenne." Barrett nodded. "Then we go." She stared. "Just like that. I told you, I will carry you, Temperance, wherever you need to go." Her eyes filled again, but she smiled this time. "You really mean that?" "I do." She stepped closer, slowly, and placed her palm on his chest. "Barrett." He looked down at her. "Yes, I think I am falling in love with you." His heart pounded as he took her hand in his. "Then that makes two of us." The wagon wheels rattled steady over the hard-packed trail that cut east through the dry hills, a sound that had become familiar over the 3 days since they'd left the ranch. Barrett drove with quiet attention, one hand steady on the reins, the other resting near his thigh where Temperance's fingers occasionally brushed his. She sat beside him on the buckboard seat, wrapped in a slate-colored shawl she'd found in the trunk beneath his bed before they left. She hadn't asked permission to take it. He hadn't expected her to. The trail was narrow here, shadowed by cottonwoods whose roots clung to the banks of a slow creek. Temperance reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes scanning the horizon like she still wasn't sure the world would let her keep moving forward. Barrett glanced over. "You remember where your sister lived?" 3rd Street off the Union Pacific Yards. Brown house with a broken shutter and a woodpile out front. Her voice was even, but her hands were knotted in her lap. He nodded. "We'll start there. What if she's gone?" The question came low, almost like she didn't want him to hear it. "Then we ask around. Somebody'll remember." Temperance shifted, the leather seat creaking under her. She stopped writing after the thaw. "Last letter said Grace was asking every day when I was coming back." Barrett didn't reach for her. He knew better. "You're going now." She turned her face toward the wind. "I don't know if they'll still be there, Grace." She was always the kind who wandered off looking for answers. Galen followed her everywhere like a shadow. He let the silence stretch, the way he did when a horse was skittish, neither pushing nor pulling, just waiting until the animal settled enough to trust. By late afternoon, the trail widened into the first signs of a township's split rail fences, a weather-worn sign pointing toward Cheyenne, and the distant whistle of a train. As they crested a rise, spires and rooftops came into view, scattered across the flat plain like discarded dice. Temperance squinted. "That's the old church roof." "We're close." They arrived in town as the sun dipped behind the freight depot. Barrett tied the horses out front of a boarding house and helped her down. She didn't hesitate this time. Her boots hit the dirt and she stood straight, shoulders drawn back like she remembered something about herself she hadn't touched in months. The street had changed, new storefronts, paint peeling in different places, a few unfamiliar faces, but the bones of the place were the same. She led him 2 blocks north, then east past a boarded-up bakery. At the end of the street stood the house she remembered. The shutter was still broken. Temperance stopped at the gate. There used to be a dog that barked when we came up the walk. Barrett waited beside her. When she didn't move, he opened the gate slowly, letting it creak on its hinges. From inside the house, a child's voice called out, "Ma? Someone's at the gate." Temperance froze. Her breath hitched once, then steadied. The door opened. A young woman in a faded green dress stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She blinked, looking toward the street. "Temperance." Temperance stepped forward. "Clara." The woman stared for a moment longer, then came down the steps fast, skirts catching on her ankles. She pulled Temperance into a tight, breathless embrace. "I thought you were dead," Clara whispered. Temperance didn't speak. She just held her sister and let the tears come. Barrett stood back, watching them rock gently on the porch. A small boy peeked from behind Clara's skirt. His hair was the same pale gold as Temperance's, eyes wide and uncertain. She knelt slowly, reaching out. "Galen." He didn't answer, but he didn't run either. Clara turned and called into the house. "Grace, come out here." A girl, tall for her age, came to the door. Her dress was too short at the wrists, and her mouth was set firm like she'd had to grow up too fast. Temperance stood. "Hi, baby." Grace didn't move. "You didn't come back." Temperance stepped closer. "I know. I was sick. I didn't mean to leave you. People said you weren't coming." Grace's voice cracked, but her eyes stayed dry. "A man said you were gone for good." Barrett stepped forward then, just enough so the girl noticed him. "That man was wrong." Temperance dropped to her knees. "I came as soon as I could. I'm here now." Grace looked at her brother, then at Barrett, then back at her mother. "Are you staying?" Temperance nodded. "If you'll have me." Grace didn't say anything for a moment. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Temperance's neck. Barrett turned away and looked out across the yard. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows over the porch, but the air felt warmer than it had all day. That night, Clara made stew from scratch while the children played with buttons and thread spools on the rug. Barrett mended a broken hinge on the back door without being asked, and when he came back inside, Temperance was tucking Galen into bed. She sat beside Barrett at the kitchen table, her hand resting on his knee beneath the wood. "They remembered me," she whispered. He looked down at her hand. "Of course they did." She leaned into him then, her head against his shoulder. "I want to bring them back with us. Not right away, but soon." He laced their fingers together. "When they're ready, we'll take them home." She said nothing more, but her hand tightened in his, and in that quiet, Barrett felt something settle deep inside him, solid, rooted, like the first fence post driven into raw land. The morning they left Cheyenne, the sky was pale with early frost. A thin film of ice on the pump handle Clara worked loose with her boot heel. Barrett loaded the last of the feed sacks into the wagon bed while Grace and Galen watched from the porch steps, each clutching a piece of sweetbread wrapped in linen. Barrett caught Temperance's eye as she stepped outside from the parlor, her shawl traded for a proper coat Clara had offered the night before. It had belonged to their mother, and though the fit was snug at the shoulders, it warmed her enough to keep the color in her cheeks. "You sure they'll be all right here?" he asked, his voice pitched low as she reached his side. "Clara's husband is due back next week. He's good to them." She adjusted Galen's scarf where it had slipped under his chin. "They'll need time, but I'll come back for them. I gave Grace my word." Barrett didn't question her. He just offered his hand to help her into the wagon seat. She took it without hesitation. As the horses pulled them west again, Cheyenne faded behind them in the silver mist. Temperance kept her gaze forward this time. They stopped overnight at a way station near the Sweetwater River. The innkeeper offered them a room above the stables, drafty but clean. Barrett laid out his bedroll on the floor near the door, but Temperance touched his sleeve and said, "You don't need to keep distance anymore." He didn't move at first. "I wanted to give you space. I've had too much of that," she said. "I want something else now." So he lay beside her, fully clothed beneath the patchwork blanket, the mattress groaning under their combined weight. She rested her head on his shoulder, her breath warming his collar. "I used to believe I'd be alone the rest of my life," she said into the dark. "I think you were just waiting for someone who heard you." She turned her face toward him. "You never asked me to be anything but what I am. I never wanted anything else." She was quiet a long while, her fingers drawing slow circles against his sleeve. "I want to marry you, Barrett." He turned toward her, surprised not by the words themselves, but by the steadiness behind them. "I want that too," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "But only if it's what you truly want. Not because you feel you owe me anything." Her voice was soft but sure. "You carried me when I couldn't stand up. You saw me when no one else would. That's not something I forget." He kissed her then, careful and deep, the kind that didn't ask for anything but gave everything back. They wed 3 days later under the cottonwoods behind the chapel in Red Butte. The preacher there had a voice like worn leather and a handshake that swallowed Barrett's whole. Temperance wore a borrowed dress from the innkeeper's wife, a faded green muslin that hung loose at the waist, but caught the light just right when she turned her face toward the sun. Barrett stood beside her with his hat pressed against his chest, his boots freshly scrubbed of trail dust. When the preacher asked him if he'd take her as his wife, he didn't hesitate. "With all I am," he said. Temperance answered the same, her voice steady even as the wind pulled at her hem. They spent their wedding night in a small room above the general store, the window cracked to let in the scent of pine smoke. She lit a lamp and sat on the edge of the bed, watching him unbuckle his belt with fingers that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from reverence. "You don't have to be gentle," she whispered. He knelt in front of her, his hands on her knees. "I want to be," he said, "because you deserve tenderness." She kissed him then, slow and deliberate, as if claiming something sacred that had waited too long. Come morning, they rode toward home with the sun rising behind them. The valley opened wide as they crested the ridge, the land familiar but changed. The wind carried the scent of sage, and somewhere down in the pasture, the cattle lowed in lazy chorus. Temperance leaned her head against Barrett's shoulder. "I'd forgotten how good the air smells here." "That's because you're breathing it free now," he said. She smiled, her hand resting lightly over his on the reins. "I think I finally believe it," she said. "This life, this love, it's mine." He turned his head just enough to press a kiss to her hair. "It always was." The first snow came early that year, thin as lace across the high plains, dusting the ridge above the cabin and clinging to the barn roof in uneven patches. Barrett stood in the doorway with a bucket of ashes, watching the sky settle into the soft blue-gray of late November. Inside, the fire crackled low, and the scent of roasting squash drifted from the hearth. Temperance moved easily now through the cabin, her steps sure, her hands steady as she stirred and ladled and wiped flour from the edge of the table. She hummed under her breath without noticing an old melody she hadn't remembered until it slipped from her mouth while shelling beans the week before. "They'll need proper coats," she said, lifting her head as he came back inside. "Grace's sleeves are already short and Galen's boots have holes in both toes." Barrett set the bucket down near the stove. "I'll ride into Laramie next week, see what's left in the trading post. Might be late in the season, but I'll find something that'll hold. They'll be taller by spring," she said, half to herself. I'll need to start on new hems before the thaw comes. Barrett brushed the snow from his shoulders and hung his coat by the door. You've already made this house warmer than it's ever been. Temperance gave him a glance, not playful but tender. It didn't take much. He crossed the room and rested his hand on the small of her back. You've got a way of making things stronger, even when they start out cracked. She looked up at him, her expression still, eyes clear. I've been thinking about what to plant come spring. Tomatoes, maybe, and runner beans. There's that patch behind the barn that gets decent sun. He nodded. We'll fence it in. Keep the mule deer out. I want the children to know how to grow things, she said. Real things, not just survive. Barrett bent to kiss her temple. They'll learn, same way you did. She rested her cheek against his chest for a moment, then pulled away to check the coals. Clara wrote. She said Grace has been asking if she can come before Christmas. Barrett stirred the fire with the iron poker. We've got room, and I'll finish the second bunk in the loft before they get here. Temperance knelt to ladle stew into 2 bowls. Galen still wakes most nights. Clara says he cries for me but won't say it out loud. He'll speak when he's ready, Barrett said, taking a bowl from her hands. He's got your eyes. They say more than most words. She sat beside him at the table, the firelight catching in her hair. Do you ever think about leaving this place? He sipped his stew and set the spoon down. Not often. You? Sometimes, she said. But not because I want to run. Just to learn what else is out there. What I might become. Barrett reached across and took her hand. Then we'll go. When the land rests and the cattle can be watched by someone we trust. We'll take the train, show the children the Mississippi. Maybe even the ocean. Temperance blinked at him, surprised. You'd travel east? I'd go wherever you need to be, he said. So long as we come home together. She smiled then, slow and real. I don't want to live in the past, Barrett. I want to build something new. I want to raise them with joy, not just duty. I want to learn how to laugh without guilt. He squeezed her fingers. Then that's what we'll do. That night, as wind pushed against the shutters and the snow thickened on the windowsill, Temperance lay with her back to his chest, his arm across her waist. Her breathing was even, but she was awake. You were never afraid of what I'd bring with me, she murmured. I knew it was worth carrying, he said into her hair. She turned in his arms, her hand resting over his heart. I've never been loved like this. He didn't answer with words. He just pulled her closer, the way you do when something finally belongs to you, not like a possession, but a promise. In the quiet, she whispered, when they come, I want them to see us like this, whole, not hiding from anything anymore. Barrett brushed her cheek with his thumb. Then let's live that way, every day. She nodded against his shoulder. We already are. The wind had shifted warmer by mid-December, rolling down from the southern hills with the hush of thaw still weeks off. Barrett had just finished hammering in the last plank of the new loft bunk when he heard the wagon wheels crunching over the snow-packed path behind the barn. He stepped outside, wiping his palms on his trousers, and saw Clara's rig easing up the lane, the children tucked beneath a wool blanket in the back. Temperance was already halfway down the porch steps before he could call out. Grace climbed down herself, boots landing square in the frozen mud. Her chin lifted like she'd made up her mind not to be a guest but a part of something. Galen waited for Clara to help him down, then trailed after his sister, eyes darting from the barn to the roofline to the smoke curling from the chimney. Temperance crouched to embrace them, arms tight as if she'd learned once what it meant to lose and would never take for granted the feel of them in her arms again. Barrett gave them privacy, heading to the horses to help Clara unhitch. He's taller, he said, nodding toward Galen. Clara tightened the harness strap. And quieter. but not as skittish as before. He's been asking if you still have that goat. Barrett grinned. She's meaner than ever, but still standing. Clara reached into the satchel beneath the bench and handed him a folded letter. From the bishop's office. They're settling the matter of guardianship. Took longer than it should have, but it's done. Barrett scanned the seal. You sure you're ready to let them go? They've been ready for a while. Grace is easier when she knows where she belongs. And Galen. He smiles more when you're mentioned. Barrett nodded once. Quiet. They'll have everything they need. I know, Clara said, brushing snow from her gloves. They've got you. By that evening the cabin had shifted around its new shape. Grace folded towels without being asked, stacking them neatly by the washbasin. Galen discovered a cat that had crept in from the barn and took to feeding it bits of biscuit under the table. Temperance moved with a lightness Barrett hadn't yet seen in her, humming not out of habit, but joy. Later, after the children had settled upstairs and the fire had burned low, Barrett found her standing by the window, arms folded as she watched the stars blink above the ridge. When I was little, she said, not turning, I used to count how many windows had light in them after sunset. I thought the more there were, the safer the world must be. Barrett stepped behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. And now I know light doesn't need to be everywhere, just in the right places. He slid his arms around her waist, resting his chin against the curve of her neck. You made this place bright, Tem. She leaned into him. You built it strong enough to hold me. They stood like that for a long time, the quiet thick around them, not empty but full. When he finally spoke, it was into the stillness they made together. I bought a parcel of land south of the creek. It's got better soil. Thought we could build something from scratch together. A bigger house. Room for what's coming. She turned in his arms, searching his face. You think we'll need more room? He touched her cheek. I think we're only just beginning. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I want to build it with my hands. Plant lilacs by the door. I want the children to remember what it was like to start fresh. Then we'll make it happen. You and me. She kissed him then, slow and sure, not out of need but out of knowing. It was the kind of kiss that didn't reach for anything more, because everything they'd ever reached for was already here. Spring came slow that year but steady. They moved to the new homestead in April, after the melt had fed the creek and the first crocus pushed through the soft, wet earth. The house went up board by board, a little taller, a little wider, with windows that faced east to catch the morning light. Grace carved her name into the porch rail. Galen painted the barn door red, slopping more on himself than the wood. The goat had twins that year, and the chickens seemed to lay twice as much as before. Temperance kept a small journal in the kitchen drawer, not of grief, but of growing things when the beans sprouted, how many eggs the hens gave, the way Galen had started speaking in full sentences again, soft but certain. Barrett built a bench beneath the cottonwood where they'd first spoken of travel. They sat there some evenings, after the chores were done, her hand resting in his, the children's laughter drifting from the creek bed. You ever think about going east? She asked one warm night, the air thick with the scent of lilac. He looked out at the land, golden in the last light. Not much, she smiled. Me neither. They didn't need to go anywhere, because everything they'd lost had led them here, and everything they'd found was already in their hands. They built a life, not from what had been taken, but from what had been chosen, and they lived it together strong and steady, full of light.